All right, this time I mean it. I'm back. I just want to let you know, even though I probably shouldn't, that I only dressed from the waist up for today. I'm not even sure I brushed my teeth. And that's fine. Everything's fine. I'm just awkwardly and silently waiting. This was my life before the pandemic, PS, by the way. Well, the awkward part, not the silent part. Anyone who knows me knows that silent isn't really an option, nor has it ever been. And I hope that you're not in the mood to be silent because I have a writing activity today that I'm pretty excited about. While I was brainstorming during the week what to do for an activity, everything felt really superficial because there's this giant elephant in the room called COVID-19. And as much as I'm sick and tired of thinking about it, it is the reality. So instead of avoiding it, I was like, how can I use that for creative inspiration? So, yeah, we're going to talk about elephants and other animals and the pandemic. We're just going to kind of get it out of there. But one of the cool things about writing is it's creative and it's fictional. So, when we write today, we're in charge. We can create a humorous version, an inspiring version, a beautiful natural version, an angry version, a sad version. I don't know. The options are endless. So today we are just gonna tackle the elephant in the room by being really creative and maybe even talking about elephants. So what you're gonna need is to open your mind and just to get ready to list, right? We're not talking about publishing novels. We won't be writing poetry. It's gonna be more like a journal exercise today. And one of the things I love to do to open another side of my brain, I have no science for this. It might not even work. It could be placebo effect. But I want you to take your non-dominant hand. For me, that's my left one. And I want you to draw an emoji. Okay? Then I want you to write your name. And then I want you to use your non-dominant hand to draw a symbol of your choice. I'm going to recommend you laugh at yourself, but that's optional. You don't have to. All right, so why did I have you do that? One, we want to open the creative side of your brain. Two, it probably looks horrible compared to your dominant hand, unless you're one of those ambidextrous folks. But first drafts of everything suck. Get used to it. That's the way that it is. So this is just kind of a little metaphor to get us started. That today we're not worrying about writing something fantastic or the next best novel. We're just worried about getting some thoughts out there. So what we're gonna do is make a list. Grab your piece of paper. I don't want you to think about reasoning or ideas or what we're doing next. Just trust the process. We're gonna do a list of things we could describe the pandemic as. So think of that word before we even start. Pandemic, COVID-19, coronavirus, physical isolation, and just sit for a moment with some images in your brain and some feelings. I don't want you writing just yet. Just let those words simmer. I'll say them again for those of you that are new. Pandemic, coronavirus, COVID-19, physical isolation, physical distancing, quarantine, Then just take a big deep breath and set those heavy feelings aside. And now you're going to take control of all the things that you can't control in the real world. You get to make this pandemic anything you want. So the first thing you're going to do is, if the pandemic were a bodily function, what would it be? So I want you to take your pen and just don't write that whole sentence, just list the bodily function. I don't want to influence you, so I'm not going to share all of mine, but I'm just writing the word cough, right? I'm being super literal right now. It would be a cough. So I'm going to go through a list. If the pandemic were a blah, 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 and you're just going to write down the first word that comes to mind. Questions? Well, it's just me here in my kitchen, so I'm just going to get going. All right. If the pandemic were a person. If the pandemic were a historical time period. Remember, there's no right or wrong, so however you interpret it, that's how I mean it. If the pandemic were an animal, what would it be? Write it down. If the pandemic were a song, wait a moment. Sorry, I wanted to write. I felt inspired. This is very morbid. I don't know. I'm in a morbid mood today. If the pandemic were a writing utensil, what would it be? If the pandemic were a piece of machinery, just write down the first thing that comes to mind. And try not to think about why you're choosing what you're choosing. We will get to that step, but it's not right now. If the pandemic were a book, what would it be? You can list a book title that you've heard of. You can make something up. You could even put a genre, like children's book. Scary. Horror. I guess that'd be a literal thing. Sorry, I told you I wasn't going to tell you my answers. All right, back. If the pandemic were a store, what would it be? An actor. If the pandemic were a geographical location or feature, what would it be? If it were a food. Huh. Some of these are hard. P.S. by the way, if I say one and you're like, I have no idea, fine. Who cares? Just like writing with your non-dominant hand. It doesn't matter at this stage. Skip it. If the pandemic were a spice, which flavor? Here's where I wish I knew more. Like, what flavor of spice seems like nothing, and then all of a sudden it's the end of the world in your mouth? That's the spice I'm thinking of. I'm not crying, you're crying. All right. If the pandemic were a color, what color would it be? If the pandemic were a singer, a genre of music, what would it be? If the pandemic were a computer virus, what were the consequences? Or what type of virus is it? If the pandemic were an item on a shopping list, which one would it be? If the pandemic were an app on a phone or a computer, what app would it be? Sorry, I'm feeling inspired. I had to write something real quick. If it were a model of a vehicle, what vehicle model would it be? Side note, I wanted to put car, and then I was like, oh, you're being so discriminatory to people who identify with SUVs and trucks. So it's just a vehicle. Any genre. 2, 4, 6, 18, however many wheels. If the pandemic were a video game, what would it be? Again, real or imagined? You're in charge here. This is your list. Next one, if the pandemic were a season or time of year, what would it be? If the pandemic were a hairstyle, what would that hairstyle be? Sorry, I amused myself. If the pandemic were a time of day, if the pandemic were a day of the week, which day of the week would it be? A household item. Again, interpret that any way you'd please. If the pandemic were an office supply, what office supply would it be? If the pandemic were an age in the lifespan of a human being, what age would that be? If the pandemic were a piece of silverware, what would it be? What about a texture? Thank goodness we're home and in physical isolation so no one can see our answer to this next one. If the pandemic were a family member, which one is it? Just to give our family a break, same thing. If the pandemic were a famous person, who is it? If the pandemic were a drink, what would it be? If the pandemic was a subject or class you had to take in school, any age, right? Elementary, high school, college. What class would the pandemic be? If the pandemic were a house project, I know some of you have lots of experience with those during this time of quarantine. Just list what house project it would be. If it were an instrument, what would it be? If it were a flower or some kind of plant, what would it be? And then last but not least, if it were a dog breed, what breed of dog would the pandemic be? All right. Don't think too much about it because thinking really gets in the way of the creative process. We can kind of make an analogy to brainstorming, right? If we weeded out every bad idea during the brainstorming process, we would get nothing done. Sometimes those wild ideas spur better versions of those wild ideas. So same's true for writing. What I'd like you to do is go through your list and circle like 3 to 5 of them that kind of stand out to you. Maybe while you're going through, you might think of some other objects, items, or descriptions to list. I don't want you to work too hard on why or what's coming next, but go ahead, read your whole entire list, laugh at your wittiness, cry over the reality of it, whatever you want. And while you're doing that, I'm going to type the directions up for our newcomers. 3 to 5, yeah. I mean, I'm not actually watching. You could circle 100. I don't care. All right. We're gonna go ahead and move on. We're still not gonna journal, but we're gonna be a little more specific. I don't want to influence your thoughts too much, but I do want to give you an example of the breadth of this. So, let's see. I could use the example of elephant, right? So this next part, I'm gonna ask you to give, for the ones that you circled, a little bit of a justification or description of why. So this is where you really get to take ownership, regardless of what you're really feeling inside. This is your creative world. If I want to make this humorous, I could say if the pandemic the pandemic would be an elephant because they take big giant dumps. And this pandemic kind of feels like a big dump that I'm not qualified for cleaning up. I could take it into a very literal, serious part. I could say this pandemic would be an elephant because it's big and it's heavy and there's no way I could move it with my own human strength. So I need to rely on something greater than me to do so. You could make it fantastical. If the pandemic were an animal, it would be an elephant, and I would build a pair of wings and fly it across the world so I could look down at all the amazing people that I'm no longer allowed to touch or cohabitate with. I don't know. Remember, rough drafts always suck, and that's okay. So hopefully that gives you a gist. I'm going to set a timer. Let's see. It's 23. Let's say 7 minutes. I know that sounds like a long time, but once you get started, it's not. And another way to think of this is if I have 3 things circled, that's really only approximately 2 minutes and 15 seconds per list item. So specifically, what I want you to do is write a few sentences for each thing you circled, justifying how that relates. So that exemplifies the pandemic because. I'm going to practice what I preach and do the same. So 7 minutes. right, we're about 2.5 minutes in. All right, 4 minutes. If you're feeling stuck, take a big deep breath. Maybe journal about one you didn't circle, or look through what you have and see if you have some sensory descriptions. If you were able to do my writing class, I guess we'll call it, last week, I talked about finding ways to describe what stuff sounds like, looks like, tastes like, feels like, smells like, and what emotion it causes. So if you're feeling stuck for these last few minutes, you might embed some of those descriptions. Again, not worrying about if you're doing a good job or doing it right, just putting it in there. And it's kind of cool. We're in charge of the pandemic in this world. While you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and open a new screen on my computer. So if I do weird things with my face, that's why. Actually, just see my face. Mom joke. All right, about 60 more seconds. Okay, go ahead and finish up the sentence or phrase that you're writing. And we're going to go ahead and stop. So before we even move on to the next step, what I want you to do is look. If you're someone who's, I don't know how to describe myself, a clipboard, specific, anal retentive, I'm not sure. Go ahead and underline, or you can just do this in your brain. But what I want you to do is read those sentences you wrote out. What kind of themes are you seeing? And again, this isn't me in my English teacher days giving you a test on theme. What I mean by that is, what's the recurring idea? What's beneath all of this? Maybe there's some words or descriptions that you find yourself repeating. So go ahead and take a moment and look for those themes. Or if you're super nerdy like me, underline them. Bonus points for color coding. All right. If you're still working on themes, that's okay. Work at your own pace. But I do want to move on. We are going to do some focused journaling. And this is where we're really going to drill into the creativity. I'm super excited to hear about your shares. I'm going to share some of mine just so you have an idea how this works. But I am going to be posting a Zoom link in the comments and on the Rockcovery page. It's kind of an author's hangout. You can just come to socialize because I miss people. If the pandemic were anything, it's something that separates me from things I love. But also for those of you that are writing and want some feedback, I think it'd be a great opportunity to share. So if you show up, you don't absolutely have to share. That's an option for you. But yeah, so while you're writing, we'll do that. But just to give you an idea of the flavor. So one of the things I chose was, I shared the elephant one, right? And when we're talking about themes, I also realized when I was writing about if it were a piece of equipment, I'm saying the same thing about the elephant example in a different way. What I said was, I don't know how it works. It's big, it's antique, and it's scary. I know this industrial equipment is necessary. It has some type of purpose, but it's beyond my own human mind to figure it out. Leaving it off seems best, but somehow it's already started in motion and I'm stuck waiting to see what's going to happen at the end, right? Very different description, but the same feeling. This is where you as a writer have to kind of take control of the process. You can stick with one and continue. Maybe you want to pull all of your descriptions together. You know, you're that I gotta have it all kind of attitude. Maybe there's one word in one sentence you like, and you're just going to continue with that and throw everything else away. You're in charge. If you're sitting there going, I have no idea, then here's a very specific direction. Choose your favorite of the brainstorms and write about it for 7 minutes. But if you're someone who likes that freedom and flexibility, this is just a jumping board. Think of it as a diving board into your own creative mind. Now you get to swim in whatever version of writing that you want to do. So looking at the clock, we do have 8 minutes, so just a minute longer than what you just did. And that'll be our last writing piece for today. So I will type this direction, but what I would like you to do is open to a fresh piece of paper. I know that's kind of an annoying thing, but trust me, there's purpose. You need that blank page staring at you. You're going to write for 8 minutes and you're not going to stop. If you get stuck, you're going to write, I don't know, until you know, okay? So for 8 minutes, that pen moves. Deal? Ha! You have to say deal because you can't talk. I mean, you can, but I can't hear you. I mean, I digress. Whatever. 3, 2, 1, go. 8 minutes. You're about halfway done, and remember, even if you think your brain has nothing to say, write, I have nothing to say. That 8 minutes sustained writing is important. If you need to, shake out your fingers, but please do yourself a favor and don't stop. Stick with it about 120 more seconds. Less than 1 minute left to go. All right, finish up those last sentences. I know that you have a burning desire to go back and fix and read and figure out. Please don't. Set the pen down. If we were really talking about writing long-term process, I learned this from Stephen King, and I practice this in my own life, and it's super difficult. Write an entire piece, put it in a folder, and don't look at it for 3 months. Terrifying. But a lot can change in 3 months. So, I don't have 3 months to wait. Hopefully, maybe I do. We'll see. Because if the pandemic were time, it'd be one that feels like it doesn't end. But I do want you to set that aside and just listen for a moment, and then you can go back to it if you want. If you're looking, this was fun, and you feel inspired, you want to keep going, when I end this Facebook Live, keep writing. Or maybe you decide you hated all of it. One really empowering thing you could do is create a character. Have your character deal with everything you just wrote. And in that way, you kind of get some ownership of this little world you created, and maybe some freedom from any anxieties or feelings that you have in the outside world. And again, don't be scared to make it funny or really, really, really sad. I mean, there's people out there who like that, and that's okay. If you have questions, message me. I'm under the name Lisa Steiner, but if you go through Rockcovery, you're going to be able to find me. Send an email. I love talking about writing. I can't get enough of it. Side note, if you want to talk about things that have nothing to do with writing, don't forget Rockcovery is here. We're a resource for our community. We have peers available. If we don't have what you need, you better believe we're going to do our best to point you in the right direction, to the best of our ability. So we're here. Reach out to us. And with that being said, I do want to thank you for taking some time today, or if you're watching this in the future, any day. I will be back next Sunday at 2. And I put the link in the comments here, but also on the Facebook. I'm going to keep a room open just for half an hour to hang out. I would love, love, love if some people shared their writing. But I know that can be scary, so it's not mandatory. I would also love, love, love just to see your faces. So, talk to you later. Maybe next week. Maybe in a minute. Bye.